Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Benicia Unified School District of October 5th, 2017. Special board meeting, informational meeting from our city on cannabis and dispensaries. And we're going to do that for open session. Roll call, please.
Clerk Ferrucci. Here. Trustee Holguin. Trustee Monette. Trustee Morgan. Here. President Wing.
Here.
Thank you.
So you want to...
I'll tee it up. Very good. Thank you. Well, good evening, trustees. Thank you for making yourselves available tonight for this study session. And thank you, everybody who had an opportunity to join us tonight. We have Steve Young, City Councilman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Young. And Heather McLaughlin, the City Attorney. She'll be presenting later, and other parents and some staff. So thank you for being here. So in working with the trustees and thinking about the possibility of cannabis ordinances being open in town, well, we thought that it would be a good idea for a school district to have a conversation about what that might mean for the students in general and any potential impact on the schools. So we thought it would be intelligent for us to do our due diligence to just have a conversation about what this could mean for us, because I think as educators, as trustees, we have many questions, and we want to make sure that we're asking ourselves those questions and planning appropriately should those city ordinances be opened and should there be any impact on our kids and on our schools. So tonight we have what we call a study session. It's a single item meeting, and we've broken it up into 3 sections, and we think that this will work. So the first 30 minutes will be Dr. Patton, who's our Director of Ed Services, will give us some background on key findings regarding marijuana's effect on the developing brain. You can go to the next slide. So she will also talk about reviewing data regarding marijuana usage and perception by BUSD students, and then identify key potential impacts of the ordinance, and then consider the proposed city cannabis ordinance, and then talk about next steps. So we've broken it up into 3 parts. The first part is from Dr. Patton to talk about youth, its potential effect on youth, and then we'll have Heather McLaughlin, the city attorney, give us an update on where you are with the city ordinance and its current iteration. And then that last 30 minutes, we thought we would engage as a governance team, asking ourselves any questions or taking any things into account regarding how we should prepare should this happen. Does that work for everybody? All right, so I'd like to introduce Dr. Patton, who's our Director of Ed Services, and she'll go over some key stats for us. Welcome, Dr. Patton.
All right. Well, I guess I should clarify, I'm actually the Director of Student Services and Special Education, because Leslie gets the title of Assistant Sup of Ed Services. But good evening. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Board, for taking the time to do this study session. So I just want to set some kind of just some parameters of what we're going to talk about tonight. And I'm just going to go through a couple of things, because anytime you start getting into student behavior, you start getting into data around behavior, there's a lot of debate. And so particularly with marijuana uses, there's been a lot of debate in the community, in our nation in general. So so basically, as Dr. Young and I started talking about this presentation, we started thinking about what is the role of the district? Why are we having this study session? And this study session is really recognizing that it is a city ordinance, and it's the role of the school district to work in partnership with the city and to make sure that we as a district are voicing the concerns that we have for our students and speaking, and as the board, you would be maybe choosing to make a board kind of a voice, a stakeholder voice, as the city considers the ordinance that they're talking about. So this is not about whether to pass the ordinance, not to pass the ordinance. This is more about how is this going to impact our students and how are we preparing for it, and to have some knowledge so that you as a board and as the community provides input to you as the board, then you can kind of center that together. So so tonight we know that we're going to talk about the perception in our community and overall of marijuana usage, and especially the danger of that perception and how that's changed. And we can look at that in relationship to alcohol. We'll talk about some of the limited drug and alcohol counseling that's available to youth throughout Solano County, and particularly in Benicia. Talk about some of the research that shows that students that use marijuana indicate that they have academic decline. And again, I'm going to give some caveats when we talk about that. We'll talk a little bit about credit recovery, when students have significant marijuana usage and they tend to have a lag in their education and trying to get the kids back up to speed towards graduation. And then just some of our own data around suspension and expulsion rates. But I want to start with some things that are pretty, instead of getting into the data and the debatable data, because we will talk about that, I want to start with marijuana's effect on the brain that is fairly consistent. Medical research that's been done that doesn't have a whole lot of debate around it in the community. And just let you know, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm just going to show you kind of how marijuana works so that you can understand what happens when our kids use marijuana and come to school. So these are some of the statistics. Some of this is debated. There is evidence that there's lower IQ scores. The debate is whether those lower IQ scores are permanent and or whether those lower IQ scores for kids who use marijuana are related to something else. So again, with any kind of behavioral data, you can't make a cause-effect relationship. You can just say these two things go together in the research. And so the research shows that people who use marijuana on a consistent, frequent basis in large amounts tend to have lower IQ scores. There is pretty consistent evidence, although we say that marijuana is not necessarily a gateway drug. That's debated back and forth, that some people do become addicted to marijuana, approximately 1 in 11, and that's from the SAMHSA data that is government data on health. It is related, again, corollary relations to lower grades and dropout rates. What we don't know is our kids that tend to have more preponderancy to drop out or have lower grades, also more likely to use marijuana. So it's, again, not a cause-effect relationship. And then with some types of marijuana, we'll talk about edibles and different types of weeds, there are some tendencies to have psychosis, schizophrenia, anxiety, and depression. Again, we don't know that it's caused by the marijuana. It may be that young people that tend to have a preponderancy for these types of issues self-medicate. The debate is, again, the medical records are not clear, but it's pretty consistent in the medical records that these go together. So looking, these are consistently in all of the research, things that happen short-term with the effects of marijuana. So problems with learning and memory, distorted perception, visual perception, especially peripheral vision, poor coordination, increased heart rate. So those things are consistent across the board. There's not a lot of debate in the research on whether those happen. Where you start getting into the debate is how long the effects last, and that is very individual. And it's also not necessarily the same for each individual each time they use. So sometimes the perception or the short-term memory loss can stop after 3 to 5 hours. Sometimes it can last 1 to 2 days. So for young people that use marijuana on a fairly frequent basis, i.e. more than 2 to 3 times a week, they may be in a chronic state of having poor memory loss. They may be in a chronic state of having an increased heart rate. So that's where you start getting into some of those medical conditions. For someone, whether it's a young person or an adult, that uses marijuana very infrequently, once those initial symptoms go away, it looks like things will return back to normal. It's our chronic users that are using very, very frequently that we worry about will have many of these side effects that will last longer. Okay, so how does it work? This is just a really simple picture where you have receptors in the brain. There are natural receptors, the cannabinoids, I always pronounce it wrong, that are in the brain. Those are natural chemicals there. And THC is a chemical that interferes with that. So basically what happens with is that the receptors and the nerve that's going don't receive the signals correctly. So just a little visual without going too much into the medical piece of this, but just to let you know that there are natural parts of the brain that are supposed to operate that way, and then the THC interferes with that. So when you look at the actual brain, and the reason I bring this up is because one of the debates is that marijuana kills brain cells. What actually doesn't interact with the actual brain cells, it actually interacts with the chemicals that are doing the nerve endings and the receptors. So when you look at this, the parts of the brain, let's see if I can get this to go. Oh, Betty. Okay. So here's a nice picture of the brain. So you have all the different parts of the brain. So how does marijuana work? And again, this is fairly consistent with the medical research. So you have your parietal lobe, and this is why marijuana helps with nausea and pain reduction, because it blocks those receptors. So you don't feel the nausea, you don't feel the pain. So it's very effective for medical marijuana use in that. The occipital lobe, where we talk about the vision, especially peripheral vision. The cerebellum, where you're having balance and coordination, those things that happen in that part of the brain, and the brainstem. And then the temporal lobe, the brainstem, you have your heart rate, and then that's where you get the bloodshot eyes, because you have that increased blood pressure there, which is, again, it's evidence-based that you see that. And then the temporal lobe, your short-term memory, things like that. And then the frontal lobe, that's where you're handling all of your emotions, your long-term memory, and particularly for emotions with our kids, there's always some emotional irregularity with a youth brain because that frontal lobe's not completely developed yet. The other portions of the brain are primarily developed by high school, but that frontal lobe continues to grow and develop until about age 25. So when you start introducing chemicals, whether it be alcohol or marijuana, to someone's brain that is still developing and also is not able to regulate on its own already, that has an increased effect on that youth brain. So, so there's a lot of different effects on a young person that may not be a problem for an adult. Okay, so before I go into data from Colorado and data, this is where the debate really starts to happen. And what I want to just make really clear is that there are a lot of reasons that data can change. And I'm going to kind of go through some of them, because as you interpret this data, I want you to interpret it with a grain of salt, even though I'm going to present it. So data changes because we become more conscious of the data. So that's one reason data can change. Let's look at an example of that. We can have suspension rates related to marijuana go up for a number of reasons. They can go up because kids are actually bringing marijuana to school more often and they're getting caught. They can also go up because we're actually tracking it better. So in our suspension system, we're not just putting the kids suspended for drug use, but we're actually tagging it to marijuana. Suspension rates can go up because we're doing a crackdown on marijuana. So when you see the information from Colorado, we don't know whether the data is going up because they're tracking it more, they're more aware of it, or the students are actually using substances more. The research is very, very mixed. The last thing that I looked at, even today from the US government, is that the number of students that actually use marijuana in a state that legalizes it does not increase significantly over the long run. It actually stabilizes back out. But what does increase significantly is for those students that use, the frequency with which they use. So, so you may not have your rate of students using go up significantly, but those that use more often and use more marijuana in those states. So, you can't see this, but this is from 2013, and the only thing I want you to look at is the difference between the blue, the red, and the green. So these are all the states, and this is a national survey that's done with youth from 12 to 17 years. It's done each year. And it's randomly selected students. And the questions are about the prior month's marijuana use. So did you use marijuana in the month prior to this survey? Doesn't ask about frequency, doesn't ask about how much, just did you use? The blue states are states that have no legal marijuana. The red states are states that have legal medical marijuana. And the green states are the states that at the time of the survey had legal recreational marijuana. So you can see that just from glancing at this graph, the students in these states that have recreational marijuana are more likely to use in the month prior to a survey and say that they did use marijuana. Okay, so looking at Colorado, because when they legalized marijuana in Colorado, they did have an agency that kept the data for them, both pre and post legalization. So this particular graph, the blue is the national average of the percentage of kids who said that they used marijuana in the previous month of the survey. So going back from the 5-6 school year up to the 13-14 school year, which is when they, for this particular survey, stopped keeping. And you can just glance at the graph and you can see that the national average didn't really change much, went up a little bit, went down a little bit. In Colorado, there was an increase. Now, it has, again, even in Colorado, stabilized back down a little bit to where they're starting to drop back down closer to the national average, but they're still higher than the national average. Again, when I talked about suspensions, so they started tracking. These are all drug suspensions versus alcohol suspensions. So these are not necessarily just marijuana. It could be other drug use besides that. But you can see that when there was a legalization, the incident rates across the state of Colorado went up significantly. Again, we don't know if this was because there was more increased awareness on that or there was actually more suspensions. We just know that the data shows that there was more activity around suspending kids for drug use. And you can see that alcohol stayed pretty stable over that same time frame. Then when you look at suspensions, expulsions, and referrals to law enforcement compared to all other violations, you can see that the marijuana violations were approximately half of the expulsions, more than, they were about 73% of the referrals to law enforcement and about 67% of the suspensions. And that was compared to all other suspensions, all other expulsions. Okay, so kind of the summary of this report, you can read this. They just saw that they, and this was an agency, again, that was collecting the data specifically for the school districts, for the Department of Ed in Colorado. They saw that there was a 20% increase in the usage of youth in marijuana prior to the legalization. It went up while the national average actually declined. And at that point in time, Colorado was the #1 state for youth usage of marijuana. All right, so any questions so far on the data that I've shared? Because we're going to go a little bit more into specific BUSD data. Okay, all right. So with our own California Healthy Kids Survey, we've been monitoring this over the years. And so this particular graph shows the question here is the frequent or daily use of, and then there's a question for cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, harmful. So it's just a perception of the harm of using one of those substances. 90% of our students feel that regular use of cigarettes is harmful to the body. That's good news. That means the tobacco companies have done their job giving us money to inform our kids that use of tobacco is harmful and will kill you. Alcohol, they also see that alcohol usage, frequent daily usage, is harmful, 90% of our kids. Then you go to marijuana, and it's really mixed. So our 7th and 9th graders, still about 80 to 90% see that it's harmful. But when we go to our 11th graders and then our kids at Liberty, they don't see it so much as a harmful substance. And those are the kids that we are really concerned about, where they start to hear that adult version that marijuana is not harmful. And while we can have the debate on whether it is for an adult or not, there's certainly enough evidence that chronic use of marijuana amongst people whose brain is still developing can be harmful. Okay, and then when we look at our 30 days marijuana usage, so again, that same question is on the California national surveys. Have you used marijuana in the last 30 days? Our 7th graders, they're a little bit below the national average. The national average is between 6 and 8%. Our 9th graders are a little bit higher than the national average until the 15-16 school year. We finally got them down under the national average. We will be taking the California Healthy Kids survey again this year, so we'll have fresh data. And then our 11th graders, well above the national average. We're almost down 2 years ago, still a little bit above the national average, but still high. And then we look at our kids at Liberty, and they're well above the national average. And we can talk about, again, the cause effect. Are more kids that use marijuana more likely to fall behind in credits? Are they more likely to want a small group environment? Do they feel more accepted at Liberty? Or you can flip it and you can say, do kids who go to Liberty, even if they weren't using before they went there, I'm not saying this is true, but if they were to go there, are they with peer groups that accept using marijuana, and then do they start using marijuana? We don't know the cause-effect relationship. We just know that it's corollary. Okay, and then this question is, have you ever been drunk or high on school property? And again, we look at our 7th graders. No. Our 9th graders, it's about a little less than 20%. 11th graders, at some point in time, were drunk or high on school property. This might include baseball, football games, leaving, getting high, coming back. And then almost 50% of our kids at Liberty admit to being drunk or high at school at some point in time. So when we look at our suspension data, this is kind of out of place, but I didn't really know where else to put it in the report. Right now, when we look at our drug alcohol counseling, we have a need for drug alcohol counseling in our city and in our county. We've talked about it at our stakeholder meetings. We really do not have drug and alcohol counseling in our county. When I went to the Mental Health Services Act stakeholder meeting for the entire county, that was one of the number one things that was listed, is just having access for our teens when they do want to get sober. There's no counseling or very limited counseling. There's a mental health therapist, but nothing that's specifically for drug alcohol. We have funded through our LCAP one teen talk group, and that's all we were able to fund, and that is starting at Liberty, and we had that last year. We will have that again this year. We are not able to fund it at Benicia High, so we're looking at ways that the students at Benicia High can either transport over to Liberty or get involved in that group if they want to. When we look at our expulsion data just for last year, I didn't go back to the years before that, but 8 out of 18 of our expulsions last year were related to drugs, and those were the ones we knew about. We don't know if the robberies were robberies to buy drugs or not, but these were ones that were specifically around drug sales, or there was a robbery and drugs were found on the student. And then this chart shows the drug-related incidents out of Power School. And I will tell you, I put this up here because it kind of emphasizes my point about whether you're keeping the data correctly. So we don't necessarily tag right now our suspensions to marijuana. So it's really hard to search Power School. These are all incidents that went under what's listed as a drug code violation. So that doesn't mean that all of them are in here, and that's something, if we want to start tracking it, we'll need to train our administrators and have them actually tag it to marijuana. That will be up to the superintendent if he wants to look at doing something like that. But right now you can see that our numbers are very low, so this would be something that if we were to want to keep this kind of a data, we would have to start with a baseline for this year prior to the opening of dispensaries, and then track it over the next couple years. Okay, so as I was at BYAC and as we've been talking, what was more important for me, this is kind of that background knowledge, but what I really started thinking about is what are the interests of our kids? So again, you can go to research, you can find a report that says that nothing happens for kids. You can find a report that says everything, the sky is going to fall for kids. But when we think about protecting our students and we think about Benicia, our community, where our schools are at, where our shopping centers are at, who the kids are that we're serving here, and what our data shows us, not just our analytical data that I'm able to show you, but just what we know anecdotally from talking to kids and from knowing teachers. And we don't have a lot of mobility rate. We have families that have lived here generation after generation. So we kind of know our community, and people that live here know our community. So we started gathering some of the interests, again, not city interests, but school district interests. So here's the number, kind of the top 4 for us. We want to have our kids have safe routes to and from school. We want our kids to be able to get from home to school without being impacted by any type of marijuana sales. We want to make sure that if there are dispensaries in the city, that they would not be areas where students congregate. The reason we want this is because of shoulder tapping. Shoulder tapping is where students are congregating, and somebody who's buying, who wants to get kids and sell, come up and approach a kid or a child that wants to purchase, and it happens with alcohol and cigarettes too. It's not something unique to marijuana. They will actually look for someone that's going into a store and ask them to purchase for them. The reason that you don't want to where kids congregate, it's a lot easier to identify shoulder tapping if you don't have a lot of kids hanging around. But when you have a lot of kids hanging around, it's a lot easier for them to do it and not be identified. Some of our administrators have talked about the proximity of the dispensaries to school in case there's a lockdown around any type of a burglary or any type of crime at the dispensary. And then one of the things that is really across the board with all of our administrators is edibles, which appeal to children. And so we're concerned about that. I'm going to flip to this picture real quick, and then I'm going to flip back. So here's a random picture of edibles. And if I'm a 4th or 5th or 6th grader and someone hands me some of those gummies, I may not know those are edible marijuanas. Those lollipops look just like the ones that they sell at any store. So yeah, when they're in the wrappers, they're clearly identified as edibles. So going back to why are we concerned about edibles? Well, obviously, and I don't know how much you guys know about edibles, but basically edibles to me are kind of like how they make hot dogs. They take the leftovers of the good leaves and they kind of mix them all together and they make edibles. And it's really great for the manufacturer because they can use the stuff that they can't sell for smoking. And so you get unregulated kind of a mix of whether it's going to be strong or weak and how it's going to affect the person. So with edibles, even if you kind of Google search, if you want to, Google search the websites that are pro-marijuana, and they even have cautionary notes about edibles. Like, don't be stupid, don't eat a lot, check yourself, because it's very easy to get a bad high from edibles. So accidental overdose to edibles has happened several times at our schools from kids who have purchased edibles. Gary, you're gonna.
And those aren't even purchased edibles. Those were students who bought marijuana or got marijuana and made brownies or cookies in their home kitchen with store-bought brownie mix or cookie mix and took those to school and sold them to school. So they weren't even stuff that was bought
Right. Yes.
as edibles. They were
Yeah.
manufactured at home.
At home.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And so so we really want to make sure that, again, the cooking with the marijuana butters and things like that, you get that mix. We don't want kids obviously selling or using at school at all. But the other thing is, besides the accidental overdoses and accidental exposures, kids that bring edibles to school or edibles left around and kids not knowing that it's edible marijuana and just ingesting it. And then, unfortunately, purposeful deception. Someone who thinks it's funny to put marijuana in a brownie or in a cookie and bring it to school. Now, just because the dispensaries don't sell edibles doesn't mean that that's not possible to happen. Yes, somebody can make cookies or brownies at home, but when there's edibles that look like that, it's a lot easier for someone to get the idea of, gosh, these are in mom or dad's cabinet. I'm going to bring these to school. Wouldn't that be funny to get my class high? And so, so that's a major concern for all of our administrators. So other district interests, we're concerned about an increase in disciplinary actions around possessions, around sales. If the message is that it's okay, will our kids, and if parents, say it's okay to use, will they be in possession? We've had, not a lot, but we've had some parents who have contacted us saying that their student has a medical marijuana card and they want them to be able to have edibles at school. And of course, there is a law prohibiting any type of edibles, any type of marijuana patches at school. So that's prohibited at school. We really feel like if the dispensary is going to go in, that we need to have a need for prevention education. We want to get proactive about this with our students, about the use prior to age 25 and the dangers of that. We feel like even without the dispensaries going in, there's a need for substance abuse counseling, and we feel that there will be an increased need. And then staff usage, that's a whole nother issue that once marijuana is legal for adults, how does that impact our staff? And Dr. Gill is going to actually come back because that's really clear. So she's going to come back at a future board meeting and talk about staff usage. So, recommendations that I would propose that the board consider, and Dr. Young and I have reviewed these together, that we exclude Southampton Shopping Center from any potential dispensary. That's a major hangout for especially our middle school students and high school students. They love to go up there after school, and that would be a good shoulder tapping place that we would not want to happen. That we exclude First Street due to its proximity to Liberty, and again, students that hang out on First Street. We don't want them to have that potential of a lockdown. That we ban the sale of edibles that's masked as food or candy, and that we, again, state funds. So one of the things, I didn't know this, and I really appreciate the City Council coming to BYAC, is that the state is taking 15% taxes off the top, but cities can only access that money, and maybe Heather can speak to this a little when she comes up in case I get this wrong, can only access that money if they do no bans on the provisions in the code. So they have to allow dispensaries, they have to allow indoor manufacturing, they have to allow tests. And so that doesn't mean all of that has to happen in your city, but you can't ban any of it, or you can't get that 15% of money from the state, the access to your share of that money. So that money is going to be given to the state to help with law enforcement, and we think that some of it could come to the schools. So we would ask the city on our behalf to look at some of the taxes from the city and some of the money from the revenues and the taxes to flow some of that down to the school district to provide some of this prevention and intervention money. Diane, you had a question.
I do have a question. I want you to back up for just a second. You talked about that they can't ban. Can you clarify that?
You know what, I'm going to ask Heather. I really would prefer Heather to because she's got all the legal stuff. I'm just mentioning it as part of our interest, but I know that we're going to have, that's one of the reasons we split it into three. She's going to come up and do the whole ordinance piece, and then we're going to have some question and discussion time. And then we would ask that money be used for prevention education, for helping us with our restorative practices that we're training our staff in, so that we don't have to go to always suspending and expelling kids, because we know that is not always the best thing. Sometimes a short suspension for different offenses, but we're trying to keep kids in school. Intervention, credit recovery, and dropout prevention. We want to make sure that we're intervening for our kids that do either have frequent use of marijuana or possibly become addicted to marijuana, and then again, substance abuse counseling. So that's all I have. Do you have any questions for me before we, and I'm going to stay, so if we have other questions after Heather presents.
Not sure if it's a question for you, but in terms of the education that we give the students today, we have the police department assists with the DARE program, and would that be adequate enough to cover the counseling and the education we would need?
Yeah, so DARE would not. We would need to start talking about specifically some of the substance as far as marijuana, and really the mixed messages that our kids are getting, that marijuana is safe, and again, with not having the debate on the adults.
Safe and legal.
Yeah.
And what is the relationship with the city, the police department, and the district? Can we ask for more resources and they have to provide them, or how does that work?
Well, the way that we've been doing it, as we know, is that we share the cost of an SRO. So
The district pays for it.
we pay for half.
We pay for one, and the city pays for the other one.
And how much do we have to pay? How much is that?
$150,000.
And with that, we also get, our SRO provides DARE training. We still pay for the material or donated. But we still do the DARE for fourth graders, I'd say. Fifth graders.
But we're not required. That's not, I mean, we do that as a
Right,
donation.
that's not, yeah, it's not required to do DARE, but it's still a drug education, but we still need.
Relationship building with the
Right,
police
it's-
and the
it's-
kids than anything else.
Correct. It's a lot of relationship
Yeah,
building with
that's-
our students and officers as well. But we don't have anything, we used to have a champion program, middle school, and we don't have that anymore.
Right.
And we have nothing in the high school for
Right.
drug prevention or drug education. Is that correct?
Just what's in our PE that we've dispersed over the PE curriculum, and our Get Focused, Stay Focused has a little bit.
And their question, which I think is, I know you said Dr. That Kush would do. I can't remember your last name. We deal with it later. But what worries me most is that if a family is down on First Street or in the Southampton Mall, and they have certain values, and everyone will have different values in this thing, but they have certain values, and their third grade teacher walks into a dispensary as they're walking into a restaurant or ice cream shop. Can we prevent that? I mean, I think of our teachers in our community as role models. And we had an instance in this town, and I know because state law, we can't talk about it, beyond what's in the public press, but it got regional coverage with news trucks out in front of here.
It actually got international coverage.
Right.
International. It was in, I think, Australia.
And that doesn't show up.
Yeah, it doesn't show up.
We have a mission statement here, be the district of choice and the place where parents entrust their children to our employees. And I think it's critical to know if our employee has the right, because it's their free time and state law allows it, to walk into a dispensary in Benicia in front of the parents and children. What message does that send? And can we prevent, are we allowed to terminate a teacher or an administrator if they walk into a dispensary in Benicia?
So that's a very complex question. The law does go into effect in California on January 1st. We will be doing lots of education of our employees and bring the information to the board before that. There are limited things we would be able to do. As far as within our organization, can an employee work? Would we be able be able to walk in using, or would be able? They will bring it? No. But what can we do to the outside? There is limited things we could do.
So we could not fire a teacher or an administrator if they walked into a dispensary next to an ice cream shop
At their own time.
in front of our children.
At their own time.
At their own time.
If they do something on the weekend that we have nothing else to do with, and they don't post on Facebook, and we don't get a big group of people here saying. Correct.
And then, but in the classroom, the district would mandate certain counseling and training.
Definitely.
That may be conflicting with that message they
Exactly.
see in town.
Yes.
Federally, marijuana is still considered a class A drug and is still not allowed. So technically, and I would bring more accurate information as the time goes by, but I would only say one sentence that technically a school district or an organization may lose their federal funding if anything like this is allowed in any school district.
You're welcome. Any other questions? So I think I'll invite Heather. Oh, question.
Ma'am, could you step up the microphone because we do,
Have to record this.
it's being,
When you say this,
Please introduce yourself real
I'm
quick.
Laura French. I'm a parent and PTA president at Benicia Middle School. And I just had a question about your last comment that the school district could lose funding if any of those things occur within the district. When you say any of those things, what do you mean? What specifically are you referring to?
So we have board policies in any school, like any school district, any other board policy. If our board policy does not ban marijuana or anything like this, and because federally it's still not allowed, marijuana is still not allowed as of right now according to federal laws. So an organization can lose their federal funding if they allow something marijuana on their school campus being used by employees or something like that.
But it wouldn't relate to what the employees are doing in their free time.
If they do what, yes, free time is totally different.
Okay. Even though federally it's still considered illegal.
Correct.
Okay.
But again, there will still be certain conditions, certain things that we will have control over. But there are other things. If somebody's sitting at their home and doing something and we have no knowledge of it, that would be none of our business.
But if Dr. Young saw a teacher walk into a dispensary on a Saturday in Benicia, he still could do nothing about it.
No. But if they do something, correct, or they post something on Facebook or something, it becomes a public issue. There might be some things we would be able to do. But again, I'll bring very specific information because what I'm sharing with you is just off of my head. But I'll bring very specific strategic information later on during a presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you, Dr. Patton.
All right, Heather, you're up.
This is Heather McLaughlin, the city attorney, and we welcome you this evening to give us an update on where we are with the city ordinance and its current iteration. So we appreciate you being here.
Thank you all very much. Am I speaking into the mic with my soft voice? Thank you all very much for the audience. There's packets in the back. I think I've gotten them all distributed out to you all. So the council is considering allowing cannabis ordinance or cannabis businesses in town. So before you've got the draft ordinance that went to the council back in September. And so we're working away on it. We're taking this road show on the road. Thank you all for having me. So there's two components to the city's ordinance. We're first proposing a public safety license, and then we're proposing the land use part. So the public safety license is the part where people have to undergo a background fingerprinting check to make sure that they don't have violent felonies, drug-related felonies, and things like that. So that will all be done by the police department. It will require the owners, operators, managers, and employees to undergo that background check. So we hope that that will provide us some sense that we're at least getting reputable businesses in town. The public safety ordinance also has a component to sort of help design a business in a way that we hope is more secure and safe for everyone. So there's, for example, you're going to be required to have a safety and security plan that will be approved by the police department. We'll have requirements for lighting and things like that. These are also requirements that we have for other businesses, but we're specifically calling them out for the public safety license. So I think not every city has a public safety license, but we thought this was a good step to take to help make sure that we're maintaining the character of our town. The next part is the land use ordinance, and that's a couple pages back in the packet that I handed out. The draft that you have in the packet is not the final draft. It's going to go to the Planning Commission on the 12th. Thank you. And so the agenda packet will be distributed tomorrow, I believe. Council, when they reviewed it, wanted a couple of changes, which are not showing up in the ordinance you have in front of you. But some of them are things like we're only going to allow 2 dispensaries. In the ordinance, we talk usually about retail. So retail versus dispensaries. It's kind of like cannabis versus marijuana. Same words meaning the same, or different words meaning the same thing. So only 2 retail so far in town. There's other types of businesses that one could propose. You could propose a manufacturing place. You could propose a testing lab. There's like some 34 different kinds of licenses that the state's proposing. It's kind of interesting. And so the city, in order to not ban any of the uses, is proposing to allow all of those. Because you were right that if we ban any of the uses, then we're not eligible for the funding for the education. Now, whether that turns out to be gobs of money, who knows? But there you go. The city has also had quite a discussion on where to allow the retail operations. Right now, the ordinance is drafted so that we'll allow it in commercial zones. First Street is basically a commercial zone. If you apply the exclusion zones shown on your map, it makes the area that is subject to cannabis use is pretty limited. You know, one of the great things about town is we have a bazillion parks. The green circles are all the parks. Well, and I don't even want to say all because I don't think it's all. It's most of the parks that we have in town. So you'll notice if you look at the foot of First Street, the Marina Green, the First Street Green, the Spit, and all the other parks sort of block out that lower portion of First Street. And then if you look at the other end of First Street, City Park and some of the parks up there block out those areas. So one of the dilemmas council's been having is, 1, whether to allow it on First Street. Right now they're proposing to allow it. But 2, should we block out those other areas? Because otherwise you're having a pretty narrow band of where you can allow the use. If you look at other areas of the map for retail use, you'll see that most of Southampton is blocked, Southampton Shopping Center, but not all of it. And that's by the school zone. Council, when they were talking about it on the 19th, asked for a change to say that if a portion of your parcel was banned, you could still use the other portion to have a cannabis retail use. So you may want to comment on that part. If you look at the other shopping centers, like, I forget what the name of this one is over by Rose Drive, the 2 over there, 2 or 3. Those ones are limited if we keep the ban for youth centers and daycares, because we've got KinderCare and some other places there. But there's some available area there. There's a little teeny piece on 5th Street, and then there's a portion up on Lake Herman in that area. But that's also banned in a large part because of the church, which has a licensed daycare school facility. So that may be one thing you want to comment on. The other use is the manufacturing, testing, sort of more industrial uses. The council has said, no, those more properly belong in the industrial areas. And the good news for those uses is those areas aren't covered by any of the exclusion zones. So those would be allowed in those areas. So I think that's all I have to say on location. How about personal cultivation? So the new proposition allows people to cultivate up to 6 plants in their own personal residence. The discussion at council was, should we allow outdoor cultivation? The previous medical marijuana regulations we had said if you wanted to grow it outside, it had to be in a greenhouse type structure. It had to be enclosed so that people couldn't see it from the right of way, couldn't smell it, what have you. So there's quite a lot of discussion at the council and some of the other folks I've been talking to about whether that's the best way to grow marijuana, whether it's better to be out there in the open. So the council is considering lifting the regulation on outdoor cultivation for personal use so that cultivation could occur in your backyard, but it wouldn't be able to be visible from the street. It would have to be behind the fence. So if it grew over the fence, you'd have to cut it off and set back a bit from the fence so that your neighbors don't have to deal with the smell as much. So that's the current state of that. On commercial cultivation, the council has said we only want to allow commercial cultivation in the industrial park, and we're not going to allow it outside. It can only be indoors. Commercial cultivation, I don't know if y'all have seen the pictures. It's kind of interesting how they have like stacking deals. So you can stack up plants in a warehouse, several stories high. So kind of interesting that you can grow it that way. Interestingly enough, in some of our walks about town, people have been talking about, well, you should grow it in a more organic way outside, blah, blah, blah. But council so far has limited it to only indoor use or indoor grows. Let's see, licensing. Ooh, here's the other thing. How do we get the two ordinances to go together? So the public safety license that I spoke about first, staff's proposal was you would apply for that one, because if you can't pass the background and fingerprinting, why bother going on to the land use permit? Council thought, well, that might not be a good use of time because it takes a while to do that background check, and it takes a little while to get a city land use permit. So they're going to allow, if it stands, allow you to apply concurrently for both licenses. So the applicant would be at their own risk. So in case they didn't pass the background, but they already spent the money on the land use permit, they would be out of pocket. Cannabis deliveries. So right now we have right now the council wants to allow only cannabis deliveries for medical patients. So if you wanted to get your recreational marijuana, you'd have to go down to the store to get that. You wouldn't be able to go and get it by calling up somebody and having it delivered unless you had a caregiver who was qualified to bring it to you. The option that the council is considering on the cannabis deliveries for medical is, should we tie that to a brick and mortar store here in town, or should we allow outsiders to come in and deliver medical marijuana to the residents? So one of the things about that is, if we require them to have a brick and mortar, we at least know their background. They'll have passed our public safety license requirements and would be insured of receiving the tax and would be able to do audits because they were here. Whether it's a good idea to limit it that much or not, the council is still considering. So fees and taxes, everybody's favorite because none of us have enough money. Council has given us good signals so far that they would like to ensure maximum cost recovery. If you've been following the city on our master fee ordinance and updating the fees, you know that we don't always charge people the full cost of a permit for, approving your beauty salon or something like that. But on this one, the council has said that we want to charge full costs. The council has also directed us to prepare a ballot measure. For the cannabis, we can have an extra tax beyond Measure C, beyond the sales tax, for recreational cannabis. So our consultant has suggested that we do something in the realm of 10%, would be similar to what Vallejo does, but would want to put an up to figure so that we could allow the council to adjust it without having to go back to the voters all the time. So that could be a way that we could help fund education and prevention programs. And I think that's the short version of the cannabis ordinance. I'm happy to ask questions. We're going to have the semi-revised version out available tomorrow for the Planning Commission. So
the one that Heather, that I see first that's jumping out is, and I guess I'm going to go with the assumption that this is going to happen.
mm-hmm.
So my concern is that you're going with a minimum of 600 feet instead of 1,000 feet away from a school or student area. That's a concern to me, especially, I mean, and I was at the council meeting when you talked about Southampton Shopping Center. I nearly passed out. I mean, we have on a daily basis at least 1,100 kids, I'm going to say, without any exaggeration, that pour into that campus.
Mm-hmm.
The farthest end of that shopping center is Jamba Juice, it's Starbucks, and it's the little 7-Eleven store where all the kids are. That's probably your area that's out of the zone. And I just can't imagine in good conscience that we would talk about wanting to put a store there.
Yeah.
So I feel very strongly, at least go back to what the state says, that you can go to 1,000 feet.
Yeah, the state law is 600, and it's a kind of interesting law because it says 600
But up
feet.
to.
But you can change it to whatever you need to. You could reduce it if you had to. So yes, on the things that you all feel strongly about, it would be helpful if you either took a motion and sent in your words to the council, that would be great, or even the planning commission if you want them to consider it. So the sooner the better. I will transmit what I think you all have said to both bodies, though.
You mentioned Vallejo. Does Vallejo allow recreational marijuana?
No, right now they only allow the medical.
And could a city allow the medical marijuana only and still participate in the state, the 15%?
I don't believe so. I think you have to allow the recreational aspects.
So is our city's sole interest in doing this just a revenue interest?
That's a hard question to say. You know, I think it's probably not just the revenue aspect of it,
What would be?
but yes. Well, economic development, different businesses.
That's money.
Yeah.
And has the city conducted any studies on the impact to the children of this school, of this community, from allowing commercial retail marijuana distribution?
No, the city has not. And as you can see, the data is interesting. You know, there's just not enough. Well, because it's been illegal for so long, there's just not enough data out there that I think.
Well, I
we
guess
can
if you
use.
haven't studied it, you really don't know.
Exactly.
And have you talked to anybody in Colorado? Have you brought people out to consult?
We have brought out consultants, and I think it's available on the city's webpage, on the cannabis webpage. We had David McPherson come out, and he worked in Colorado and has worked at some of the other places. So he's got a pretty good
On the
knowledge of
school
it.
districts, on the impact
Well,
of school?
I don't know about school districts, but on the cannabis idea.
And I'm struggling to understand the logic in the ordinance that seems to say you can grow it in private, but you can buy it in public. You can grow it as long as it doesn't bother your neighbors and impinge upon their values. As long as it doesn't, away from your fence, there's a fence. But we're going to put it on display on the main street in town for people to walk in and buy it. And if I'm taking my children to Double Rainbow, which is not in the zones of exclusion, and someone puts in that little area there, or the physical therapy place, and next door to that is a marijuana dispensary, I can, my only choice, if I don't share those values, is to no longer frequent First Street, or expose my children to, and having to have a conversation in the home and in the school that this is a violation of federal law, but it's okay because we're looking the other way in the city. And as a parent and as a trustee in this district, I believe that is completely inconsistent with the values of this community for which I was elected, most of us campaigned. I hear it over and over again when people come to testify to us as to we need to support the teachers, we need to fund programs, we need more counseling, that people moved here to this community because of the schools. And to put on public display marijuana retail distribution in violation of federal law introduces a complexity to every parent of this town, to every teacher, and as employers, on how we can manage that. And you make our lives harder. You make our teachers' lives harder. We have less money than you do. We cannot tax. There's no assurance that the city is going to share a dime with us. You are going to introduce this ordinance and pass it before even putting on the ballot a tax measure. I know as an attorney, you cannot pull, if you grant a license, you can't just revoke those if the tax doesn't get passed, leaving us with a very big problem. I also know, as an employee of a large financial institution, that no bank in this town will handle the cash from those stores. You expose every citizen in this town to increased crime and robberies because that is a prime target. It is untraceable cash, and there has not been enough time. And it is at a point where most people, once they learn of what's going on, will not want to go anywhere near one of those stores. And I just can't tell you how opposed I personally am as a parent, as a trustee, to what this ordinance reads. I think you've acted arbitrarily, capriciously, with no governmental interest at heart other than uncertain tax revenues. You've compromised the values of this district, of this community, and for the reasons people moved into this town. And you've done it quickly, without study or reflection. And I can find no motive other than an agenda does not reflect the values of this community. And I will, whatever you'd like, in any way you'd like me to voice the opinion, but I cannot understand the contradiction between private cultivation and public purchase.
Yes, it's interesting framing. So on the odor part, I should note that the odors for the private residents aren't regulated. There was a provision in the ordinance that initially required that, but the council has removed that by allowing it to grow outdoors. On the money aspect.
Let's go back to that for a second. So my neighbor is growing marijuana. I'm an asthmatic. I can't take those strong smells. What are you going to do to protect me?
Yeah, so under the ordinance as it's being revised, that provision is no longer in there.
So nothing.
Yeah.
So I can't, well, I was already at the council meeting with you, and I have to agree with Mr. Morgan. I think this is appalling that you're doing this to this small community, and it is for the sake of $1. I mean, let's really be honest about it. That's what this is for. And to have completely ignored the school district as a partner when it's because of the school district that people move into this town, I think that's unconscionable, and I can't support anything that the council is doing at this point anymore.
What's most troubling is no one from the city reached out to the district to ask their opinion. It wasn't for Dr. Young informing us this was occurring. There's no partnership. We have to pay money to the district for police officers? And then you're going to add this? Every parent in this town should know what this city is doing, that we can't hire teachers for their classrooms, but we have to hire a police officer, and it's going to get worse.
Right. So on the cash aspect of it, this is not onto the overall thing, but the interesting thing about the marijuana businesses, we've been to a couple of them and seen that they actually do use credit cards and things like that. I think it shows up as different charges. So it doesn't say, Joe's marijuana business. It'll show up as, Joe's supplies or something. Yeah.
Right, you're facilitating a fraud.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Right? I'm a banker. I know what's going on. You're facilitating a fraud.
Well, the city
federal law prohibits the movement of money to these institutions. It's called money laundering.
Right.
Yes.
And you're going to give a license to a money launderer. You put the city at risk for losing federal funding. You put the district at risk for losing federal funding. People can't even go to Vallejo to buy recreational marijuana, yet you're going to have them come here? It's not the town we wanted, but we're going to have to deal with it, and you're not offering any help or contribution.
Heather, I had a couple questions. When the city council, you put a survey together and you put it out to the community, were there any questions in there asking the community and parents to weigh in on the potential effect of marijuana sales on youth and schools?
No, we did not have that question. So we only talked, I think, about locations and types of businesses.
Okay.
And it was very, 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 very deep. It was very hard to get. Which I kind of see as intentional.
No, it was not intentional.
Why? Can I just ask a question? Was there any consideration of putting this up to a vote to the community?
This is a huge culture shift in our community. We should be voting on this. Not every town, not every city in California is putting a marijuana dispensary in their town.
Correct.
Some people are standing tall and saying, hey kids, this is against federal law. We are not going to do this. And here we are, this little community, this little family community. We're looking at not one, but two. Not medical, but medical and recreational. Come on, guys.
In our downtown.
In our downtown,
Next to the ice
where
cream
you
store.
have 4th of July celebrations, where we have Christmas on First Street. What are you going to do to the businesses there? I don't get your thinking. I just do not get your thinking.
I echo a lot of what my partners have said up here, and covered a lot of range already, so I don't want to have to go through that. But one of the things I did want to clarify is that my understanding is at this point that even if a tax goes on for these businesses, there is no guarantee that education is funded in that tax. And so, it's further compounds the discussion that the city council is not valuing the youth and the education aspect of this issue. Because like we have had to do in the past, as educators, we're not new to the fact that we have to do major education around these issues. And, it will be more along the lines of the education that had to be done when the impacts of smoking became known, which if you look at our history, was a 20-year process to change that value set for people. And so we are looking at, along with the passage of this law, unless we really get ahead of it and get into education and do it quickly, several generations of youth that are going to be severely impacted by this. And so for our city leaders to not even consider that in this discussion is horrifying. So, this is not a new concept. We've had to do this with smoking. We've had to do this with alcohol. But even alcohol has more requirements for distribution than we are putting on this substance, which we know the negative impacts for youth. Mm-hmm. And so to skip all of that in this discussion, I think is a real lapse of judgment on the part of our city leaders.
Now, one thing, when I say that the tax doesn't have an education component or a component for you, I don't know that there's a reason why we could limit it. It's just general tax. How sometimes when we do taxes, we say it's going to be for police and fire or whatever.
But we haven't done that. We're going to okay this, right, and then maybe we'll get to the tax later.
Correct.
I think we're talking about a fundamental shift in the relationship between the city and the school. We're paying for your police officers. We support the fields and the support facilities for this town beyond the school. We need to reconsider the relationship between the city and the district to make sure the city is paying its fair share. The burdens you're playing on what our core mission is to educate our children, yet we play this community role, and you, the city, pay nothing for it. And the city needs to start contributing to the burdens it's imposing upon our core mission of educating our youth.
Yeah, it's probably a topic for a different discussion because, of course, the city feels like we're paying for things that maybe we don't need to. And it should be a true partnership between both the city and the school district because our aim should be the same, improving.
Partnership requires a dialogue.
It should be a good partnership. There's no reason for it not to.
Right.
We're not a big town. But clearly, that was ignored for the city. It's making such a dramatic move on our kids.
Mm-hmm.
To do this without studying the impact to children, without reaching out to the superintendent, to the PTAs, to collect feedback, shows that there wasn't an interest in our children or any thought put into the impact of this school through the district. And if you were to move forward, you only confirm that.
How many cities around us are considering or
So that's why I stepped up here. So I have, and I sent it to my printer, so I will walk down after I share this. This is as of August 18th, 2017, Solano counties. So Dixon, their current proposal is to limit 2 dispensaries allowed in the city. Fairfield is to prohibit all, both medical and recreational dispensaries. And I can go through all the ordinances, but I'm just going to focus on the dispensaries. Rio Vista allows dispensaries in the C2, which is community commercial, and C3, general service commercial and industrial park areas. Sassoon, dispensaries in all city zones are prohibited. Also, mobile dispensaries are prohibited in Fairfield and Sassoon. And my hometown of Vacaville has prohibited basically everything, dispensaries, outdoor growths.
Dr. Patton, so one of the stats on that, so all of the school districts in Solano County, Fairfield, all of them with the exception of Dixon are not doing this. And Dixon is thinking about it, but all the other school districts in Solano County and Vallejo are not doing it. I know that I can't speak to Martinez, but I know Walnut Creek's not doing it. And why am I saying all this, Heather? Dr. Patton, you can continue, but I'm just wondering, did the city council take that into account as well, that the other school districts who we in our district are not, in the county rather, are not doing it?
And I will tell you that living in Vacaville and having my sons now graduated, he graduated last year as a senior, we had a parent forum that was a co-parent forum by the city and the school district around the proposed, as the law had passed and what it would look like for our city. And it was very well attended, and I think everybody got a chance. It was debated just like it is in Benicia, but everybody got a chance to weigh in, and the city is continuing to have this discussion. It's not banned forever, but they are moving very, very slowly in the district, the community, the police department, and all of us are talking about it. So,
Could I just ask a couple quick follow-up questions? So, in San Francisco, where I work today, you cannot go anywhere without seeing an advertisement for marijuana on every city bus. Will Benicia restrict advertising? If I'm on 680 and the big thing, can a medical dispensary advertise going to First Street?
So currently, the leases for the billboards prohibit medical marijuana.
But will they in the
shown
future?
on it.
Will this ordinance prohibit advertising on things posted on signposts or anything about come to First Street to get marijuana?
So no, but I don't think we need to do that. That would already be prohibited. You can't have off-site advertising like that.
Where it's permitted, the billboards, would it be
Right.
permitted there?
So under the lease, no, for the medical marijuana. The lease, because we didn't anticipate it,
Recreational.
didn't talk about recreational.
So would you could advertise recreational marijuana available in Benicia on the billboards?
I'd have to look at the lease language to see whether it is prohibited or not, and the council may consider amending it if it's not clear enough.
And then the authority of the police department to not grant the public safety license, is that, if they look at it and say the way you're handling cash, the way you've got is that reviewable, or is that within their sole discretion?
No, just about every decision that city staff makes is appealable. So the ordinance is set up, and there's a slight glitch in it right now, but the version that'll go to the planning commission is better. So police chief's decision is appealable to the city manager, which is appealable to the city council.
The city manager or the city council could overrule the police department.
They could.
I got another question. So what other cities in Solano, since that's where we're at, is considering recreational use ordinance, dispensary ordinance?
So I think that's the information that Dr. Patton was just giving.
Okay, so
So
Dixon.
just Dixon. So Vallejo has medical. They are not, and they say they are not going to allow recreational. So that means,
No, that is correct.
nope, I just talked to a city official. They are not looking at it right now. They said maybe in the future. They're only allowing medical, and that they are not looking at any recreational.
Which
So that means that
place of
everybody
choice, yeah.
and the southern end of Solano County is going to come where?
Our First Street.
First Street, Benicia.
How is that okay?
I mean,
You keep shaking your head yes, and I know, I mean.
You're
representing-
just, yeah.
How is that okay?
I'm just the attorney.
I have a question. I'm wondering if you can help me understand the conversation that went on about delivery for medical and in-store purchase for recreational. What was the decision-making process there?
So the decision-making process, I think there was, should we tie delivery to a Benicia business so at least you get the benefit of the taxes and the regulations? Or do you want the delivery, if you go onto weeds.com or Weedmap or something like that, just about every city has lots of places advertising for delivery into town. So the question is, do we want to allow everybody to come in and deliver in town? Or do we only want local businesses to come in and deliver in town?
But what I'm struggling is why would you restrict medical? Again, it's the four walls, right? Medical marijuana would be okay if you deliver it privately to a home, but for recreational use, you can go next door to Double Rainbow and get it whenever you want. I don't understand the logic even there, right? If you want to make it available, why wouldn't you allow recreational marijuana to be delivered in town too, but privately? Why the public display, and why are we going to have to deal with the employment issue of our teachers potentially who are role models walking around and entering a dispensary? Why not just say home delivery? Again, government's supposed to weigh competing interests, and they're supposed to be prevailing government interests. And I don't understand. It seems like it's almost intentionally being designed to burden us, right? For our teachers, for our students to see it.
Right. Well, that's part of the argument here is having it in visible areas. Is that normalizing the usage? So,
well, if that's like the governmental intent, then I can tell you we can challenge that in court, right? Because you are going to harm our students, and the state does not have a governmental interest in normalizing marijuana against federal law.
Right. I'm saying normalizing it is a bad thing.
Okay.
So
I got another question, and I don't know if we're the largest employer or second largest. Valero, have you reached out to Valero? Because they have a drug policy that, in my understanding, the marijuana stays in the system 30 plus days, but they're now doing hair sample and all that sort of stuff to work on their property. And
yeah,
what's their...
So I made a presentation to the Benicia Industrial Park Association, and that was brought up. Some of these big companies have the zero tolerance policies, and especially with the edibles and the ability to inadvertently eat it, you could lose your job.
Do you know that most businesses have that restriction? I mean, my kids used to work in Raley's. They lost their job if they were caught. They had regular marijuana testing.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? I mean, the impact on the kids, the implication of how much you have ignored the children and are going to hurt them. I don't even think we begin to fathom what that number is going to look like. I really don't. And I just, I guess, can't you go slow so that you could begin to figure out what some of this is? Because you're never going to be able to roll it back.
Well, we got a couple of questions. Steve, you want to? Yeah, and the lady in the
I'm Steve Young. I'm on the city council. It's with some trepidation that I stand here having heard you all tonight. I want to take some of the heat off of Heather because she's just an employee. I am one of the policymakers, so you can direct your concerns to me. I've certainly been listening to everything you said, and I've been listening in prior meetings. At one of the last council meetings, Dr. Young and the principal from Benicia High were there, and Ms. Kleinschmidt suggested, well, let's keep talking about this. And I took her up on that, and I went and spoke with her. And we had a good conversation, and I think that conversation, as well as my meeting with the Youth Advisory Council and some of the things I heard tonight, have made me rethink some of the issues myself. In particular, on the issue of Southampton, I agree. I think that's probably not a good place for a dispensary, and I will make a motion to exclude that as a possible location. On the edibles, I think that's a real issue, and I would also make a motion to prohibit candies and cookies and things that would appeal to kids. I think somebody asked, maybe it was Mr. Morgan, what the rationale was for moving forward on this, and I think, frankly, it's state law. This is a new state law. Not only did the people of California pass it, but the people of Benicia approved Prop 64 by 64%. That is not a small majority. When we did the survey online, there were 1,400 people who responded, the majority of whom said, yes, we want dispensaries in town. How much of it? It was about 54%, something like that. And how many people took the survey? 1,400. 14. Well, yeah, but this was all the ones who could return.
And you don't know how many people took it multiple times.
No, it was prevented from taking it more than once from one computer that was set up.
The survey showed that people wanted it on First Street or in the shopping area.
Okay, so let's just keep our person at the podium. If you want to speak or ask a question, I'm going to have to ask you to come up to the podium. But
okay, I think the struggle that I'm having with some of the things that are being said is I don't see the direct causal relationship between the existence of a dispensary and increased access to youth. This is adult uses. Kids are not going to be allowed anywhere near these things. They're not going to be able to walk in and do this. So if kids are getting marijuana now, and presumably they are from what we heard tonight, they're getting it illegally. They're getting it on the black market. The dispensaries that we're envisioning would be relatively high-end, relatively expensive product, not the kind of thing where somebody's going to be able to go in and buy relatively expensive stuff and then increase the price and sell it to somebody else, which is illegal anyway.
What do you think we should do as employers at the district? When a second grade teacher enters a dispensary and is seen by families?
Well, I think since this is now a legal activity, I think you would be hard pressed to tell your employees that they can't participate in illegal activity.
As role models of our students, what do you think we should do in instilling values, as Dr. Patton talked about, in a second grade teacher, third grade teacher, when it's against federal law?
Okay, let me speak to the federal law.
No,
question.
I'm asking you as the practicality of what you're proposing. What do we do when a school teacher, you saw the TV trucks, you saw the national news coverage. What do we do when a school teacher among families walks into a dispensary and walks out with a bag of marijuana?
I'm not going to advise you on this. I don't have a good answer to that. I think if you set rules for your employees,
we can't, as you said, we can't set rules.
Right.
And so until you give us an answer for that, then please don't pass laws that we can't respond to.
Well, I
Even
guess
short of the employment issue, which we know you can't answer, I'd like to roll back the discussion to a few sentences ago where you said, well, we envision a high-end shop and we envision an expensive product.
Right.
How are you regulating that to assure that occurs? Because hold on for a second. Buying alcohol if you're 21 is legal. If you're under 21 is not. Mm-hmm. And we can't even regulate that on a consistent basis. So
well, I would suggest that these will be much more regulated than alcohol is.
And well, that is my question. Tell me how you're doing that and how that is in the regulations.
Well, it's not what
because
we're doing. It's what the state law requires.
Okay.
State law requires a level of identification, not only to walk in the door, which doesn't exist in a liquor store or in Raley's. Any person can walk into Raley's and if they're 21, buy whatever kind of alcohol they want. Kids can wander through the alcohol aisles with nobody saying anything. They can wander down First Street next to 9 different bars that are selling alcohol and nobody says anything. This is now a new legal product, as is alcohol, as is cigarettes.
Yeah, but we don't have a smoke shop on First Street and we don't have a dirty liquor store on First Street. But we're going to put a pot dispensary on First Street.
We don't know that. We don't know that. One of the realities.
How come we didn't allow the gentleman's club, the strip club out in Southampton? Why did you draw the line on a strip club, but recreational marijuana is okay? Where was the moral judgment there?
This is before my time. I can't speak to that. I wasn't around when that issue came.
And I hate throwing you on the hot seat here, but why is it? It says state law is now legal, but why is so many other cities in the state of California not allowing it? They're coming strictly out and say, we're not even going to allow medical marijuana. We're not allowing any marijuana in our city limits. So why does Benicia think that we have to allow it?
Well, it's not that we have to allow it. We have heard from a majority of the citizens that they would like to see it.
Why not put that?
You ever heard of a majority of 1,400 people that took a survey?
That's correct.
Why not? Why not a vote?
Well,
coupled with the tax.
Okay.
Let's Steve.
If I can answer some of these. If we pass an ordinance and people don't like it, they can do a referendum. And the referendum can be to take it out, or I think the way it works is it says, city, you either pull this back or it goes on the ballot.
Why don't we just put it on the ballot to
I was
begin
gonna say,
with?
Well,
you know, since it is
what went on the
becoming
ballot was-
such an interesting topic of discussion, why don't you just have citizen referendums? Let's have a conversation, do forums like these other cities have been engaging in, and then put it on the ballot. It really does feel, honestly, I'm sure that was not your intent, but it feels like you're slipping this through during the night.
And as
And
Heather will
it's
tell
exactly
you,
how it feels.
if the city grants an ordinance, grants a license pursuant to this ordinance, a referendum cannot close the shop. You cannot, under the takings clause of the Constitution, once you grant that ordinance, once you grant that place, the citizens cannot remove it. So you're interfering with the democratic process by you making this value decision contrary to federal law and the values of this community. If you're true to your oath, you would put it up for a vote.
Let me speak to the federal law issue. Yes, it is illegal under federal law. However, the Justice Department, who is the one who enforces this kind of stuff, back probably 4 or 5 years ago, there was a rider put in the Justice Department budget, and it's called the Cole Memorandum, and it says that the Justice Department is prohibited from spending money on prosecuting any marijuana-related issues in states that have legalized it. And this year, with a new president, Attorney General Sessions went back to the Congress and asked that this clause be removed. And the Congress, which is Republican controlled, said no. They kept this prohibition in place. I don't know why, maybe because it's a states' rights thing.
There was a DEA raid in my neighborhood for marijuana distribution not 4 years ago. And you know that.
I don't know that.
Well, there was.
I'll take your word for it. All I'm
Right?
telling you
There's
is that
nothing preventing the DEA from enforcing distribution and sales. You're talking about personal possession, but if a large-scale operation, there's nothing, cultivation, there's nothing preventing the DEA from coming in and making arrests.
What I was saying is that the Justice Department is prohibited from spending money going against cities and states that are operating within.
So do we tell
if I may finish, in conformance with their own laws.
Do we tell our school children that there are some laws you can obey, and there's some laws that there's a rider that says the Congress can't spend money, so you don't have to pay attention to them? Is that the values that we're instilling? So when a teacher, again, walks into a dispensary with their bag of marijuana coming out in plastic, and Daddy, isn't that against the law? I saw that on TV, yes. But in Benicia, there's some laws we obey, and there are some laws we don't.
Well, it's in California.
No, in Benicia, we've chosen, the only district in Solano County has said we are allowing recreational marijuana purchases. In Benicia alone, in this county, we don't, as a value, decide whether or not we follow the laws. Is that what you want us to tell our children when the teacher, the administrator, walks into a dispensary and we say to our students, well, that's not really a law you have to pay attention to?
I'm not going to tell you what to tell your students. I mean,
you have any children in the district?
No, I don't. My children are grown, and I've only lived in.
Do you believe that people come here because of the schools?
Sure, absolutely. There's no question that this is a good school system. I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, where I don't see necessarily how the existence of a dispensary is going to lead to increased use by youth. I haven't seen any data that makes that connection.
But you haven't even studied it.
You haven't.
Well, I've been looking at this for quite a while.
But you haven't.
No, I'm not going to quibble with the issues of.
There's data right there. It shows that in Colorado, suspensions went up 62%.
There's also data from Colorado that says crime went up 30+%. Our police
backpacks walk into a school and they smell like marijuana. What do? Oh, that was Mom. It was in the car when Mom made the purchase. They stopped off and made it. Backpack smells like marijuana. What do? We call the police. Mm-hmm. Are you going to support the increased police presence that we're going to need every time we smell marijuana?
I would be open to certainly sharing some of the tax revenue if we get any. The one thing, the last thing I want to say about
Yeah.
the last thing I want to say about dispensaries is that this may be a lot of concern about nothing. There is a dispensary operator who wants to move to Benicia, would try to get a license if possible. She's been going around to all the commercial centers and basically being turned down by other landlords.
What does that tell you about the values of this
Well,
community?
what it says is,
Right,
it may
so
not be an
why
issue.
would we be,
It may
well,
not
why
be an
would we be
issue.
supporting it if our landlords don't even want to rent space to this?
And I've also heard that the Benicia Industrial Park Association has said, no, you are not going to allow any dispensaries in our area.
And I would agree with that, because I think it's just a bad location.
So if our First Street committee
I
says
think-
we don't want anything here,
I
I mean, are we gonna look at that too?
I think we're hearing different things from merchants on First Street. There are merchants, frankly, who like the idea of 200 or 300 new people walking down the street every day, coming to town. Well, I've talked.
Really,
to them.
200 or 300 marijuana users on First Street, and I'm going to take my children to ice cream now?
Well,
And come down there for
If-
the holiday.
I don't
Or
think
drive
it's
down
fair to
there,
demonize
or-
all marijuana
Um,
users as well, one of the things we found is that the majority, I don't know if it's a majority, a significant portion of the people who answered our survey who were in favor of dispensaries were over the age of 60. This is
Over the, what
age
age?
of 60.
60, okay.
These are boomers who, use it for whatever reason.
And they don't have children that they're worried about it.
Right.
Well, again, but I think, well,
Maybe
I've gone too far.
Hole, and I would think that would concern you. But I'm going to share just this one last comment, and then I'll be quiet because I think you got my message. I happen to be a U.S. history teacher in this district for like 30 years, and I taught American history and I taught common print. One of the things I always taught my students, who are now adults and parents in our community, is that federal law supersedes state law. No matter what the state passes, federal law is the one that ranks the highest. So with that, I'm going to be finished.
Okay.
all right.
Thank you, Steve. Brianna, you want to come up, please?
So could I suggest that you all make a motion or something so that we can get your thoughts? I've got a lot of your thoughts down, but if you wanted to take a uniform approach, that would be great. And I
We're
will
allowed
pass it
to
on.
act on anything.
This is a study session, so what I would like
Darn
to,
Brown Act.
Propose that we pass a resolution in opposition to the city ordinance.
Awesome.
and I would like to have Brianna speak, and then we have the lady in green. Has had her hand up a bunch of times too, or Till.
Good evening. Brianna Kleinschmidt, principal at Benicia High School. I had the opportunity to attend the city council meeting a few weeks ago and attended so that I could listen and learn. Was not planning to speak that night, but ended up speaking just to provide some correct information because there was some misinformation being presented at that time. And I want to show appreciation. I did have a chance to meet with Vice Mayor Young in my office following that, and I really appreciated the opportunity to do that very much. And am more appreciative than I can tell you that that did not fall upon deaf ears, and that we are being heard. So thank you very much for that. I've also had the opportunity to follow up and speak with a few people that I know in the city of Vallejo, and was surprised by a lot of what I learned, some of which has already been discussed, that Vallejo has 11 dispensaries. It was 12. They just were finally able to get an injunction on the 12th and close it down. So they now have 11 that are medicinal only. They, from what I was told from an employee of the city who specifically works on this area, they are not currently in talks. It's possible down the road that they would consider recreational or adult use. They currently are not. And currently they have 3 dispensaries that are about 3 miles away from us. Benicia Road, Springs Road, and one other that I apologize, I don't remember the location, but there is a map that's accessible from their website. One of the things that we talked about was that while there is state law now, the state law is set as the minimum, and the cities have the opportunity to be as conservative as they would like and go above those restrictions. So for example, while the state has a 600-foot radius for sensitive areas like schools, the city can go as high as they would like. And in fact, one city who has ordinances that do not ban any of the state uses, instead they've addressed this by having their zoning so restrictive that there's nowhere left in town for these businesses to open. leaving themselves eligible to this supposed pot of money from the state taxes that may or may not come to cities because there's no language around that, but still not having those businesses come into their city. Interesting approach. Vallejo, even though it has 11 dispensaries, they do have in place a 1,000-foot restrictive radius around their schools. So they've actually gone above and beyond what is currently proposed in Benicia's ordinances, and I would definitely ask that we consider a 1,000-foot radius, if not more, around our schools, our youth centers, and our child care centers. I know that there's been a lot of parks. I would venture to include parks in that as well. Another thing, I'm very glad to learn that the idea of splitting the parcel of the Southampton Shopping Center is possibly changing, because I think that would fall more in line with state law, which state law actually looks at the property line, the horizontal property lines of those two areas. So I think that we might have gotten into some arguable area had we been splitting the Southampton Shopping Center. And I think it's what's best for students. I see teachers, students regularly at that Jamba Juice. We hold Panda Express fundraisers every week for the schools and the students. I think that's definitely in the best interest of the students and in the best interest of the city, excuse me. I also just am concerned about the timeline, because I think there's definitely opportunities for the school district to partner with the city to make sure that this is done well, if it is done at all, to look at opportunities for impact fees, to look at opportunities for penalties should a business sell or give or somehow be involved with minors, that there be some steps put in place, maybe a 3 strikes opportunity that would result in the loss of the business license should they be found to be out of compliance in that. And then hopefully the opportunity for some fees to be included that would directly and guarantee support of the school district, of additional police to be able to enforce some of these regulations, to be able to go in and make sure that they're doing everything that they say that they're doing, because that will take additional personnel. And I would imagine that the Benicia Police Department, much like the Benicia School District, does not have extra funds sitting and waiting for that to happen. So I appreciate the opportunity, again, to be heard, to continue this conversation. I think it's a very important conversation. I know that the survey, I actually participated in it. I happened to find it on Facebook, I think Benicia Happenings. I took the survey. Apparently I was in the minority in terms of the age group that responded. But out of those 1,441 responses, while it might have been a 54 or so % that were in favor of it, it was about 70% that wanted to see at least 1,000 feet, if not more, of a radius around the schools. So I would hope that the city council would listen to that as strongly as they're listening to the other results. In addition, there was a very large majority, around 70%, that wanted to see it in the industrial park, while there was a very small number that wanted to see it downtown. So while we're taking some information from that survey, which from what I hear, not everyone had the opportunity to respond to, especially parents, I would hope that we would at least listen to those other pieces as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for a very reasoned response, Ms. Kleinsmith.
I'm Melissa Phillips. I'm the PTA president at Mary Farmer. I'm not as organized as she is. I actually just came on a slight whim, remembering that this meeting was happening. I just had a couple of quick things that I wanted to bring up. Obviously, she covered a couple of my points, but one was the idea of passing this being, it's a law. Obviously, it's not a mandate. Nobody says you have to put this in your city. So using that as a reason is obviously a very invalid reason. Saying it's for revenue, I get it. But if we're talking about potentially getting 0 of the 15% or the whatever the initial is, and then adding 10, to get that 10%, you got to sell what, a billion to get a million of tax revenue, which equals 100,000, and we're paying 150,000 for the officer, which means the first 1.5 million only repays the money that the school district is putting in to cover the cost of that officer. So I'm thinking if the city's doing it, I know that there was a lot of emotional impact, but it's like if the relationship is severing at some point, then that obviously that 150,000 isn't going to come here, and that potentially gets to go towards the education that if it passes without a group. I know that sounds a little convoluted, but my point is there needs to be a lot of money to make up for the money that the school district is already putting into the police department and the city. So that was all. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take you'll be our last one because we need to continue on to our other meetings, but.
Okay. Again, I'm Laura French, and I'm just wondering, why is it a foregone conclusion that this is going to be passed? And as the comments were made earlier, why were not the citizens of the community and forums had in considering this issue? And what would it take the city to hear or evidence from the people in the community to reconsider this decision? Would you, a petition, how many people, what kind of data, what kind of information? I think either it wasn't considered or you're really misinformed on what the people in this community want. And as Mr. Morgan said, a lot of people move into this community because of the school district. And if revenue is the main reason this is being considered, have you looked at the impact this will have on other businesses? If it is on First Street, are people not going to frequent First Street? Are those businesses are they gonna suffer? Are they gonna pull out of Benicia? Are home prices gonna go down because families won't want to move to a town where their dispensaries are in it? And what is that going to do to our community and other sources of revenue and income? Have you looked at that as the overall impact as opposed to just isolated, what are these particular businesses going to bring in tax revenue to our community?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And one quick comment that the survey that the city put out, I just wanted to point out something that I observed at the city council meeting, that I think the city manager, gave it a disclaimer that it wasn't statistically significant and people could, it wasn't a scientifically distributed survey, and she acknowledged that. So I think as you're going forward with that information from the community, that it's it's a gauge, but maybe not a scientific one that you would want. That's right.
President Wing, can I ask Heather just two process questions for our benefit? Just the first one, if you can just answer it quickly, what would happen if the city of Benicia did nothing in regards to this? And then the second question is, when's the next city council meeting or action item on this?
So I'm a lawyer. I don't know if I can answer something quickly. So right now the city has a ban on any cannabis uses for recreational. I've got a moratorium on the books. That moratorium will need to be renewed and some action will have to be taken in, I think, about a year or so. The next city council action is November 7th. That's when we were proposing to have the first reading of the ordinance. So certainly come out for that meeting or write your letters or emails. If you want, I've got cards if you want to send your emails to me, or you can send them to the city clerk and we'll make sure they're included as part of the packet. Our packet, because of our open government ordinance, goes out about a week ahead of the meeting. So if you can get them in ahead of time, the council always appreciates that because then they're not overwhelmed with a stack of last minute info.
When is our next meeting? Goes if we can't adopt a resolution before that. Okay, so could we could calendar. I mean, we represent the same people the city council does, the same electorate, and
we can bring it up at our
for a resolution
for action for our next meeting.
At the 19th.
Okay. Well, please let me know if you'd like me to attend. I'm happy to come back. I appreciate your time and thoughtfulness in considering this matter. I really do.
We want to thank you for coming as well. We appreciate it, Ms. Stevie.
Thank you, and thank you, Councilman, for joining us.
When you were talking before, I have an October 12th meeting.
October 12th is the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will consider this draft, so you all are more than welcome to come at that meeting as well and express your opinions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, is there any public comment on closed session items? We're going to move to closed session here in a second. Okay, seeing nobody coming up for closed session items, we are going to adjourn to closed session. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.